Hey folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris, and this report is about an announcement that came out about a month ago, the 26th of January 2021, from the South African government announcing the Tourism Equity Fund. Now, this is a fund created, you would think, to ensure investment, growth, entrepreneurialism within the tourism sector, but you'd only be partially correct. It's a fund created, and if you are a South African that is not black, you need not apply. But we'll get back to that in a moment. Also on the 26th of January, the government released the Tourism and Migration Report. This is an annual report. The data runs through November 2020, but it's embargoed until the 26th of January 2021, the same day the Tourism Equity Fund was announced. Now, that's not unusual. It is frequently the norm for the government to manage these reports internally within the government to allow officials to see them before the public gets a chance to digest them. So this was released on the same day that the Tourism Equity Fund was announced. It covers the period of through November 2020 from the previous November. There you go. So in this report, we're going to talk about the impact of tourism in South Africa, and you're going to see just how grave it has been in 2020 because of the COVID-19 political machinations. The Tourism Equity Fund was a $1.2 billion program announced, or 82 million US dollars, to be financed jointly by the government and by private banks. Now, in 2020, the tourism industry lost at least 70 billion rand. Wow. Businesses have collapsed, game parks are falling apart, and now the government is coming up with an equity fund to help businesses enter the space while others ail, competing with them with an unfair advantage. Now, the tourism industry throughout 2020 suffered, of course, because of what has happened in the COVID pandemic and government's poor reactions to it and misunderstanding of epidemiology and infectious disease. This has led to travel bans both to and from and within South Africa, greatly harming the tourism industry. It also led to ridiculous curfews that have harmed the tourism industry, capacity limitations, only X number of people can be at a venue, usually less than 50%. And a cap being on 100 or less, depending on the location and time, and alcohol bans, which affect these tourist venues that sell food and alcohol. Major impact. Travel bans, capacity limitations, curfews, and alcohol bans have all had a absolutely catastrophic effect on South Africa's tourism industry. Now, does it matter? Well, yes, it does. In fact, 2018 statistics show that tourism accounted for 2.8% of the gross domestic product of South Africa. Directly accounted for 2.8%. The indirect contributions to the tourism industry, because they, of course, have suppliers and those who feed and facilitate the infrastructure of the tourism industry, was far larger. 8.2% of gross domestic product in 2018. 8%. Wow. Employment, which is critically important in South Africa with an astronomically high unemployment rate, 4.2% of all people working in South Africa formerly were employed by the tourism sector. 709,000 jobs in 2018. The indirect employment, of course, with that larger ecosphere, is 9.2%. So nearly 1 out of 10 people with a formal job in the economy was working in the tourism sector in 2018. Tourist arrivals for 2018 totaled 7.8 million. Respectable. Not bad for a place that's very far out of the way and inconvenient for a lot of people to get to. But why do people go to South Africa for tourism? Well, lots of good reasons, folks, not the least of which are world-class facilities, the affordability of it, particularly when the rand is in trouble. Like right now, the rand is doing okay, but it is still up around 15 rand to the dollar, even better against the pound. And so affordability, world-class facilities, wildlife, not unmatched, but amazing wildlife nonetheless. Adventure, you can do things like zip lining, paragliding, hot air ballooning. You can do hiking, mountain hiking, horseback riding, surfing, all sorts of outdoor adventures in South Africa. And of course, South Africa's natural beauty, whether it's the whales at Hermanus, the penguins in Simonstown, the majesty of Table Mountain, or it is the Kruger National Park, the High Veld, the Drakensberg Range, the beaches at Durban. You name it, South Africa has unparalleled natural beauty. So all of these things contribute to reasons why people want to go to South Africa on holiday. There are, of course, distractions, pervasive and horrific crime, not being one of the least important factors, but in fact, one of the major reasons that actually limits tourism. It would be far greater were it not for South Africa's bad crime reputation. Now, where do these arrivals come from? Well, in the tourism industry, most of the overseas arrivals come from the following countries in this order: the United Kingdom, Germany, the United States, France, and Netherlands in that order. But even the largest of those, the UK, has only 40,000 tourists who visited South Africa in 2019. Tourist being someone who had an overnight there, not just someone passing through at the airport or at a port facility and then moving on. Tourist is someone who stays overnight, at least one night. So UK, Germany, USA, France, Netherlands, top one being 40,000. Now, these are important tourists because most of them come with a big wallet and spend a great deal of money in South Africa. So that's very much helpful for the economy. Now, the most tourist arrivals come from within the Southern African Development Community in the neighboring states. And in order, they are Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Mozambique, Eswatini, and Botswana. And the highest of these is over 160,000 visitors, for instance, Zimbabwe. The lowest in that group, in the top there, was Botswana with just 58,000 arrivals. But of course, that's even larger than UK, which is largest overseas arrivals. Nonetheless, all these tourists are important to South Africa's economy. Here's the thing. In 2018, the tourism sector contributed 139 billion rand directly to the economy. Last year, in 2020, they lost at least 70 billion rand. So somewhere around 40 to 50% of the total revenue. This is a total disaster for the tourism industry in South Africa. It is shockingly bad, and not improving at all. Here's the impact on tourist arrivals. In November of 2019, just that single month, taking tourist arrivals being from all over the world within SADC and from the overseas regions. In November of 2019, there were 850,000 tourist arrivals in South Africa. Contrast that with November of 2020, just a year later in the midst of the pandemic, 101,000. That is 749,000 fewer arrivals. Wow. That is catastrophic. So with this backdrop of the tourism sector in virtual freefall and total collapse, the government of South Africa decides to impose racist policies to benefit people based on their skin pigmentation. Never mind how stupid and reprehensible this is. Let's not forget that the average tourism sector business, 2 out of 3 of its employees tend to be black South Africans. So when you harm minority-owned businesses, in this sense, minority are white, mixed race colored, or Indian, Asian, when you harm those businesses, you also cost their employees. 2/3 of the employees tend to be black South Africans. Talk about cutting off your nose to spite your face. Well, let's talk about the Tourism Equity Fund just briefly here. And then we'll talk about COVID to wrap up this news story. So in order to qualify for this process, you have to meet certain standards. But what is the purpose of the Tourism Equity Fund? Well, it's to provide grant funding, concessionary loans, in other words, good deals, and debt finance. So it will help do equity acquisition so you can buy out an existing business, and you can also start a new business or expand your existing business in the tourism sector if you're a black entrepreneur. Yeah, so this is meant to facilitate the growth in the sector by targeted groups such as women and youth. The applications are for as much as 10 million to start. That's the minimum amount. It's about $667,000 US. You can get a grant up to 20 million, 1.3 million US dollars. And you can also get a SIFA loan, that's a small enterprise funding loan, of up to 15 million or 1 million US dollars. So ranges anywhere from 10 to 20 million rand per project, $667,000 to as much as double that at 1.3 million US dollars. Yeah. So who gets to take part in this and what's the purpose of it? Well, these are the factors. They will look at majority black ownership. In other words, 51% of the company has to be owned by someone whose skin pigmentation makes them considered black in South Africa. And women ownership, youth ownership, jobs facilitated, location, and stage of the business cycle. Of those prerequisites or determinations for awarding this money, only 2 of them are legitimate, 3 of them legitimate. Jobs created, location. Some locations are better. If you're going to put a luxury hotel in the middle of the Karoo, high desert chaparral, you better be in the right spot or it's going to be empty. So jobs facilitated or created, location, and the stage of the business cycle where this company is at in its business. All of those are legitimate to make grants and loans, but women ownership, that's illegitimate, and it's misandric. Youth ownership, why in the world would you focus your precious limited resources in an economy that's in free fall and an industry that's collapsing around you, focusing on youth ownership? If anything, experience is what's needed now, not youth ownership. And it certainly should be consideration for granting monies that make you a competitor with people who actually know something about the field they're working in. So in order to qualify for the Tourism Equity Fund, South Africans must have an enterprise registered as a legal entity in South African terms of the Companies Act of 1973. The entity must be operating in the qualifying subsectors, of which they're listed at their website. The entity needs to be registered and compliant with the South African Revenue Service. In other words, it must be in good standing for paying taxes. The enterprise must be 100% owned by South African citizens. So far, this is all really good. Nothing wrong with it. But now we get to the bigotry and racism. The entity needs to be predominantly black, owner, managed, and controlled. 51%. Why? Even in the best of times, that's a stupid policy. In this crisis, it only ensures chaos and suffering in a country where millions have lost their jobs. Wow. Well, folks, it's much worse than we thought. We knew the tourism sector was going to take a hard hit because they were shut down. Curfews would not let people be out and about. They couldn't sell alcohol. And they had travel bans to and from South Africa as well as within South Africa. So we knew it was going to take a hit. But considering the fact that it's been announced that the tourism sector lost as much as 70 billion rand, and that's just since the end of March until the end of the year when they lost that money because they were doing regular business prior to that. So in just 9 months, wow, 70 million rand, or nearly half of the total revenue to the sector. How anybody can survive losing 50% of the revenue while still maintaining responsibilities to pay mortgages, pay salaries, pay for power, pay for security. Wow, unbelievably crazy. And the number of international overseas arrivals dropped from 850,000 per month in November of 2019 to just 101,000 in the month of November 2020. Shocking difference there, folks. Well, that's the state of South Africa's tourism industry. One hopes it gets better, but I'm not going to hold my breath, particularly with the government coming up with racist policies to privilege people based on skin pigmentation. It's vile, it's bigotry, it's racist by its very nature, and I thought we got rid of this with the end of apartheid. Well, if you're not a subscriber to Chris White Africa, why not become one? Smash that button. Be sure to toggle the bell icon to get notified of updates, and give us a like, folks. Thanks a lot for your time, your patronage, and your custom. God bless.